2025 meeting of the East Bend School District Board of School Directors. Who know all, please rise to follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, it's my understanding there are no requests to comment this evening, so we'll move on to the rest of the agenda. First item for approval is the approval of minutes for the January 27th meeting. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Ms. Bowman? Aye. Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Next item is the district update. Dr. Campbell.
Good evening. It's been a busy 2 weeks, and our students have been doing amazing things. So I just want to say in advance, my update is pretty robust this evening. So I'd like to start off by congratulating several Emmaus High School students who recently participated in the PMEA District Orchestra concert that was recently held at Symphony Hall. Those individuals are Noah Frazier, Brighton Yu, Nick Maroon, Colby Zhang, Sam Doherty, Stavros Marangos, Brandon Larico, Vivian Zong, Clary Zom, Zinig Fan, Justin Chan, and Santiago Chavoya Ramirez. We're equally proud of our students who recently participated in the PMEA District Chorus. So those vocalists are Emily Brown, Anna Chavoya Ramirez, Diego Chavoya Ramirez, Santiago Chavoya Ramirez. I would say that's a talented family. Dane Drozda, Dylan Dewey, Christopher Fullenwider, Noah Hover, Liam Hughes, Ryan Jack, Kira Kelly, Charles Kenny, Hannah Kern, Tom McDonnell, Ashley Fee, Varun Rajam, Lila Schneider, Ella Skaggs, Benjamin Wilkes, and Bryson De Silva. Additionally, Anna Chavoya Ramirez has qualified for the NAFME All Eastern Chorus, a tremendous accomplishment for Anna, who's a senior at Emmaus High School. We're also very proud that Ian Honschind is a student at Emmaus High School who has excelled at the Eastern PA High School Bowling Wildcard Tournament with an average of 230 in his first 4 games and a 219 over 7 games. He earned the top spot, and he has actually qualified for bowling regionals in Lancaster on February 28th, and we wish him luck. We'd also like to congratulate Jackson Kreiner on being named a finalist for George Mason University's highest academic scholarship award. Jackson is a senior here at Emmaus High School. He has made significant contributions to our school community, not only through his excellent academic achievement, but also he is an individual who was highly involved in many clubs, activities, as well as has leadership positions in those activities as well. And so we certainly wish him the best in the final selection process for George Mason. Emmaus High School's academic team recently took first place at the Keystone Cup Quiz Bowl competition that was recently held at the Pottstown High School. In particular, Dan Whitmer earned top individual honors and placed first overall, while Gavin Germain secured 4th place. We'd like to recognize Emmaus High School's academic team on their 2nd place finish at the Bulldog Buzzer Challenge that was recently held at Berwick High School. Again, team captain Dan Whitmer also had an outstanding performance there and earned 2nd place individual honors. Just this past weekend, the Eyre Middle School hosted the Math Counts competition. And so we are very proud of the Math Counts team from Eyre Middle School. Those individuals earned recognition as the most improved team from last year, and the Eyre Math Counts team placed 2nd overall. Out of more than 20 middle schools across the region, we had 5 students from Eyre Middle School: Caleb Yu, Rebecca Wilkes, Caleb Michaud, Carter Camacho, and and Wake Hurlin, who all finished among the top 40 competitors. Rebecca Wilkes earned a spot as one of the top 3 female competitors in the competition, and Caleb secured 7th place overall. So we're incredibly proud of our entire Eyre Middle School Math Counts team, and wanted to give a special recognition to Mrs. Hummel, who is the advisor for that particular team and does a great job in supporting and preparing our students for the competition. And also I wanted to recognize Mr. Roof, the principal, and our Eyre custodial team. It's really a tremendous amount of work to host a regional event, and they were so very gracious in dedicating their Saturday to make the day a great competition for many local middle school students. In terms of other great accomplishments of our students, our high school athletic teams continue to perform very well. As a matter of fact, as we speak, the Emmaus High School girls basketball team is getting ready for the semifinal round of the EPC playoffs against Parkland. That starts at 8 o'clock. So we'll perhaps get some updates on that. Our rifle team this past weekend took first place in the league tournament. And finally, girls wrestling is competing in the District 11 tournament this upcoming weekend on Saturday. In terms of some other community events that we have upcoming in the district, recently the East Penn Special Education Department kicked off its parent training series, with a session specifically on assistive technology. That particular session was held on Tuesday, February 4th, and our next training is scheduled for Tuesday, February 18th from 6 to 7 at the administration building. The training is focusing on behavior management strategies and will be facilitated by our BCBAs, who are behavior specialists that work here in the district. We also have, I spoke about this, I believe, at our last board meeting. Emmaus High School is sponsoring its next parent engagement night. That's scheduled for this Wednesday, February 12th at 6 o'clock. It will be held in the high school auditorium. There will be several really important topics that will be discussed, including social media safety, mental health resources, and workforce preparation. We will have local business leaders who will share insights with our students about skills and qualities that they're looking for in future employees. And so certainly there's a career readiness component to it. And we will also have teachers from Emmaus High School's World Language Department, Music, Art, Tech Ed, Family Consumer Science, Wellness, Fitness, Business, Library, as well as Driver's Ed. So from those departments, we'll have teacher representatives who will be available as well to meet with students as well as parents. It's hard to believe, but we are already geared up for kindergarten registration for the 25-26 school year. And so on March 1st, our online kindergarten registration process will go live. We will certainly communicate and post the link to the online registration. If there are any families who have questions about the registration process, they can reach out here to the district administration office, to Mrs. Crosley, our registrar. And also, we're always happy to answer questions regarding kindergarten registration at any of our 7 elementary buildings as well. Before you know it, the spring theater season will be upon us, and so tickets are available now for the EHS Theater Department's performance of Mamma Mia, and again, tickets can be reserved at the district or high school website. We're also already starting to think about graduation, and so the celebrations have begun for the class of 2025. In particular, the nomination for Grad Spotlight is open, and so if there is a senior who you would like to recognize to be considered for our Grad Spotlight campaign, that information is available again on our district or high school website. Save the date, we have a family information night that's coming for the 5th to 6th grade transition process. That will actually be held later this spring, actually June 3rd, but we just put the date out there as early as possible. So any of our families who at the end of this school year will have a 5th grader transitioning to 6th grade, there will be family information nights held on June 3rd at both middle schools. And then finally, East Penn annually compiles a summer camp guide that provides our families with a comprehensive list of local summer activities, camps, and programs. And so if there are any organizations that would like to showcase their summer program offerings, we're happy to include that information in our camp guide. And you just have to contact Laura Grow at our district office to have that information added to our summer camp guide. It seems a little odd to be talking about summer camp guide when we're doing 2-hour delays because of icy weather, but we're always working and planning ahead and looking forward to sunny days. And that's all the report that I have for tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Quite a list this evening. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Okay, thank you again for your report. Moving on, the next item is under the budget. We're about to embark on a series of several presentations. Hard to believe we're at yet another budget cycle, but it is the new year. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Campbell to introduce tonight's presentation.
All right, we're good, thanks. All right, yes, thank you, Dr. Levinson. We are excited to share what we would describe as our first official budget presentation for the 25-26 budget cycle. As you know, annually, administration takes what can be a really robust and lengthy process and breaks it up into a series of several small presentations that focus on several key aspects of the district's budget. You can see that back in December, the board did adopt a resolution not to exceed the Act 1 index. And so at this point, this evening, we're really taking a look, perhaps a deeper dive into several crucial components of the district budget. Tonight, Mr. Saul, in just a few minutes, is going to provide an overview of fund balance as well as take a look at our revenue projections for 25-26. And then you can see in future meetings, we'll do a similar overview of proposed expenditures. We then, in March, will jump into the long-range fiscal and capital plan. And then the second meeting in March and the first meeting in April, we anticipate that we will do presentations on upcoming budget priorities. Those are new positions that are being proposed as part of the district budget. And ultimately, the process wraps up in June when we present, and ultimately the board will adopt a final budget that can then be submitted to the state. As you will likely hear Mr. Saul emphasize tonight, we are very early in the budget process. Clearly, you can see that we have several months in which we will continue to work through the process collaboratively. Some of our assumptions our financial assumptions that you'll hear tonight will certainly become revised and more clear as we work through this process throughout the spring. And so at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Saul, and he's going to take a look Before I turn things over to Mr. Saul and he takes a look at a quick recap of previous budgets, I did also want to remind the board and the community of the approach and some of the guiding principles that we as a team have adopted as we work through the budget process. So ultimately, our goal is to continue to provide high-quality, equitable educational opportunities for all students in the district, while also recognizing that obligation to continue to sustain the financial health of the organization as well. You can see priorities for us continue to be preserve existing district programs, implementing tiered systems of academic and behavioral supports that address the diverse needs of all students, continued sustaining of plans for funding capital improvements, including facilities, as well as our technology infrastructure, and then also systematically phasing in staffing needs to support the K-8 realignment, which the board will hear more about throughout this spring, and also continuing to phase in district priorities to address those needs that we've identified. So at this point, I truly am turning things over to Mr. Saul, who's going to begin with a budget recap of previous years, and then we're going to jump into the fund balance for 25-26.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. As Dr. Campbell said, we're going to talk a little bit about fund balance and then revenues. This presentation should feel a little familiar in terms of format. We try to keep it the same from year to year, so we're sort of looking at a consistent layout and looking at things consistently. Obviously, there are some changes from year to year in terms of what's happening and what's driving, in this case, fund balance and revenues. So with that, let's just jump right in. What I first like to do is just talk about the fund balance and sort of where we've been, where we are, and where we think we're going in terms of fund balance. So I'd like to just take a minute to sort of acquaint everybody with the layout of the first slide, because the next couple of slides are similar in terms of layout. If we look at the far left column, we can see that is the 23-24 budget that was approved in June of 2023. And I'll just go down through it quickly, but you can see total revenues were $176.9 million. The total expenditures in that budget were $188 million. There was a budgetary reserve of $8.9 million, which we back out to determine what our anticipated expenditures are. Again, we carry the budgetary reserve line item in case anything unanticipated comes up. We have that flexibility in our budget. But for all intents and purposes, we hope that we're not going to spend that. And so we back that out to get our anticipated expenditures. Then we have a surplus or deficit, which is the difference between the total revenue and the anticipated expenditures. I'll come back to that in just a minute. And then we can see our beginning fund balance plus or minus the surplus or deficit gives us the ending fund balance. And so then, in the middle column, you can see that throughout the budget process, but specifically in May, just before the board just before the adoption of the next year's budget, we try to anticipate where we're going to end the year, and you can see what we anticipated. And then finally, just back in December, we've finished the audit of the 23-24 year, and you can see where we actually ended the year. I wanted to circle back to that surplus and deficit. As a reminder, in 2023-24, you can see a budgeted deficit of $2.1 million. That represented the use of the ESSER funds that we had set aside from the fund balance. So basically, we set the money aside, it accumulated in fund balance, and then we had a planned approach for spending those funds down in subsequent years. And then you can see we ended the year actually in a positive situation, and so we still spent those monies down. It just meant that we had additional monies more than we had anticipated. The ending fund balance, the audited ending fund balance of $26.2 million, we'll carry that forward now. And we'll get back to that in a minute. But you can see here on this slide, on the left column, it is the current year budget that was adopted by the board in June of 2024. And then the next column is estimates that we have prepared, administration has prepared in January of 2025 in terms of where we believe we will end the year. Obviously, we're still very early in the year. We'll continue to revise these. Final revisions will be in May. You can see, again, there was a budgeted deficit. The budgeted deficit for 24-25 was actually a combination of two things. It was the use of those ESSER funds to mitigate the learning loss that occurred as a result of the pandemic, as well as you may recall that we started setting aside funds for technology infrastructure, upgrades and upkeep. And so those two things combined are what that budgeted deficit represents. And again, that was a planned deficit spending. At the bottom of the estimated column on the right, you can see that the green arrow is what carried over from the previous slide, $26.2 million. We subtract the anticipated deficit of $500,000, and we are anticipating, at this point, ending the year with a fund balance of $25.7 million. And then to the 25-26, the budget that's under development. Again, you can see total revenues at, again, very early in the process, but of $194 million, expenditures of $207 million, less the budgetary reserve. And so at this point, there's a deficit of $3.1 million. A portion of that is the anticipated network upgrade and improvements. And at this point, there is a small structural deficit that administration is still working on to iron out those wrinkles. So you can see by the yellow arrow, we carried over the anticipated ending balance in the current year, less the deficit gives us an ending balance of $22.6 million. So you can see how the fund balance sort of flows through from year to year. On the next two slides, I've provided the textbook definitions of the various portions of fund balance. Our audited financial statements break down the fund balance. They're buried in that document. You may or may not have identified those. I think it's important to briefly highlight those because we hear a total of, for instance, at the end of June of 2024, a fund balance of $26.2 million, which sounds like a very big number. But when you start to break it down and have an understanding of what the components are, again, from a policy standpoint, we often hear the state lawmakers talk about these huge fund balances that school districts are carrying. But again, that's why I would like to educate you a little bit about when you break that down and look at the individual components, maybe it's not quite the same as what they're describing. So there are 5 components, and I'll go through those very quickly. The non-spendable represents prepaid expenses. So at the end of the year, we had paid for instance, subscriptions that we had not gotten the opportunity to take advantage of yet. So you can see the small part of that is prepaid expenses. The restricted fund balance are funds that are restricted in their use. As an example, you can see grants that we receive where the grantor has specific restrictions in terms of how we use those funds. So for instance, the Education Foundation, East Penn Education Foundation funds are EITC funds, which had a specific purpose when they were given to us. They just had not all been spent. The food service donations are the giant supermarket donations that we're receiving. Memorial funds are monies that are given to the district to hold in trust and to be given out as scholarships at the end of each year. And then the commencement awards are very similar. It's just they may not be, there may not have been a full, quote, trust arrangement. It may be that there's just a department in a high school, for instance, that's given money and it hasn't all been distributed. So the trust arrangement is, the memorial funds are like larger holdings of monies, whereas the commencement awards would be smaller holdings of monies. As we're moving through this, you can probably see that they become somewhat less restrictive, if I can use that word. So committed fund balance is a fund balance that the board passes a resolution and commits those funds to a specific purpose. An example of that is those ESSER monies that we set aside. The board each year passes a resolution and says, here's the money that's remaining and here's how it will continue to be used. And so you can see as of June 2024, there was about $1.2 million, a majority of that being used in the 24-25 or the current school year. And also the technology infrastructure fund that we set up to address our technology infrastructure needs. Again, when we passed the budget, the board adopted a resolution designating that those funds are set aside and how those will be used. Those funds can only be, the use of those funds can only be changed in the same way that they were put into place. So the board would need to pass a resolution if we wanted to use those funds in some other manner. Administration does not have the ability to unilaterally change the use or purpose of those funds. An assigned fund balance, similar to committed, is for a specific purpose, but they're assigned by administration. And in this case, what this represents is the budget deficit for the following year. And it's the full budget deficit, not just the small portion. It's that budgetary reserve plus the deficit. So we have to look at the total expenses, not the anticipated expenses, compared to the revenues. And basically, from an accounting standpoint, you have to designate a portion of your fund balance as if you were to spend your budget completely. You have to have those funds assigned, let me use the correct term, so that they would be available to cover those expenses. And then finally, unassigned fund balances are those which are available sort of without any restriction or any other specific uses. A portion of our assigned fund balance we allocate to our buildings. So when they receive grants, such as Weiss Markets might give them $500 to do something in their building. We assign or allocate those funds to the school building and allow them access to those funds year over year. And then finally are the just completely unassigned, no specific purpose. Those unassigned funds are what help us sort of navigate, for instance, the summer months when we're paying out payroll, but we don't have taxes coming in to help support that. So having some unassigned funds is really important for the district to navigate those times. Or if there were times when, for instance, the state, several years ago, the state didn't pass their budget until December. Again, having unassigned funds allowed us to help sort of navigate that time when we weren't getting state funds flowing in on the revenue side. So hopefully this gives you a picture of the breakdown. Again, that 26.2 million sounds like a big number, but when you start to break it into the component parts, I think you get a little bit different picture. Next, I'd like to move on to the revenue piece of the budget. Again, we have the textbook definitions of the various revenue components available for you to review or reference back to, should you need those. And so we'll look at the three primary areas of revenue. Local revenues, those coming from local sources. State revenues, those revenues coming from state sources. And federal revenues, those coming from the federal government. In terms of local, probably the biggest and the one that gets the most attention, obviously, is the real estate taxes. So I'd like to move to the next slide, where we have a breakdown of the calculation of how we calculate the tax levy or the tax revenue for real estate taxes. There are three primary components to the real estate taxes. Those three components are the assessed value, which are established by the Lehigh County Office of Assessment. They assess each property appropriately. And we receive reports monthly in terms of what our total assessment for the entire district, all of the real estate property in our district. You'll recall that we update this throughout the budget process, this assessment number, based on the updated reports that we receive from the county. The second important piece to the real estate tax calculation is the millage rate. The millage rate is the piece that can be the increase in the millage rate is what is compared to the Act 1 index. So when the board passes a resolution that says that we will not exceed, for instance, the Act 1 index or 4%, this is what that is referring to. And so you can see currently, in terms of the budget we've developed, the revenue includes a 4% increase in real estate tax. And the final component is the collection percentage. You can see we've used 96.2%. Again, we've tracked this for many years, and that's relatively consistent from year to year in terms of our overall collection percentage. The question could be asked, why don't we receive 100% of our real estate taxes? There's about 5 things that can have an impact in terms of not receiving 100% of real estate taxes. The first is if someone pays by the end of August, they receive a 2% discount. And so that discount is taken off the total tax levy. The next thing is we have preserved farmland in our district where the millage rate is frozen at the time it was preserved. And so we're not getting the in 24-25, the 21 mills for that property. We're getting the mills that were in place when it was put into farmland preservation. We have a senior property, I'll call it senior. We have a property tax rebate program where people can be rebated based on eligibility. Again, that is netted off of the total tax receipts, and so that will play into the collection percentage. We also have the Hamilton Crossings tax increment financing, or TIF program. Again, that reduces our total tax receipts. And finally, there are people who just don't pay by the end of the payment period in December, and so they get turned over for delinquent collection, and at that point it becomes a delinquent revenue, which we'll see later, as opposed to a real estate. So all of those things contribute to why do we have a collection percentage that's below 100%? Real quickly, the basic math is it's the assessed valuation times the millage rate, which gives us a preliminary tax levy. We receive property tax reduction allocation funds from the state. And so qualifying homesteads get a tax reduction on their bill. And so we have to deduct that from the tax calculation. We actually get that money on the state side as state revenue. And so we deduct that, and that gives us the revised tax levy. We multiply that by our collection percentage, and then we get our final tax levy. So again, that's the computation for how we determine what the real estate tax revenue would be. Continuing on the real estate tax piece, here's a graph which we provide annually, and it's included in our long-range plan. And you can see the line represents the Act 1 index for each year, and the bars represent the actual tax increase that was implemented for those years. I would just like to draw your attention to 2015-16, where the actual tax rate is higher than the Act 1 index. That was a year where exceptions were used by the district. What I would say about that is, for all intents and purposes, exceptions are generally not even available to school districts anymore. The one limited circumstance is an increase in special education costs. And we do evaluate those each year around the time that we're bringing the resolution to the board for its consideration. At the bottom of the slide, you can see the average, and this is inclusive of the 4% tax increase that's in 25-26, but you can see the 5-year and 10-year average rate increase when you average those. I'd like to go back to the local revenue slide and highlight some changes in the remaining revenues. Specifically, I'm going to address anything that's plus or minus 100,000. Anything below that, if you have questions, I'm certainly happy to circle back later and answer those. But I thought that was a good threshold to quickly address changes. In terms of interim taxes, just look at my notes. Oh, right. For the interim taxes, for 24-25 for the current year, based on some trends, we thought that those numbers would be coming in a little higher. As we're looking at the trends that are actually occurring, it looks like they're not coming in quite where we like at that elevated rate. I think when you look at development around the district, it would lend you to believe that we would see stronger collections in terms of interims, but it's again based on actual collections and some history, look back at history, we're just not seeing that. So we revised the estimate down slightly for 25-26. For the current earned income taxes, earned income, as you'll recall, is on the percentage on everyone's income. It's the local income tax. For the current year, we're seeing revenues coming in about 1% above where we had anticipated. And working with our earned income tax collector, Berkheimer, trying to project forward for next year, we're projecting a 3% increase. So when you combine that additional 1% in the current year and 3% for next year, it gives us roughly a 4% increase for 25-26. For the real estate transfer taxes, that one's a really difficult one. Because we really don't know how many properties are going to sell or the magnitude of the properties that are going to sell. If we have one warehouse, for instance, that changes hands, that can create a significant amount of additional revenue in real estate transfer. And so we see anomalies as we look back over years. We've tried to do some averaging to come up with a solid number. And so you can see a slight increase for 25-26, sorry. The earnings on investments were actually, projected to come in just slightly above the budget for the current year. However, interest rates have sort of tapered off since the beginning of our fiscal year, and so this is just an adjustment for where we believe interest rates, are now and will continue to be through the remainder of this year and into next year. I'm gonna break what I said I was gonna do. I said I was only gonna comment on things that were 100,000 or more. Actually, I would like to draw your attention to the revenue for from local governments. You can see a decrease in that. That represents funding that we received from Lower Macungie Township for participation in the crossing guard program at Willow Lane. We were notified last month in January that the grant that was being funded by Lower Macungie Township was not appropriated in their budget, and therefore we've made an adjustment for next year. And I think that gets us through all of the highlights in the local revenue. For state revenue, I'd like to start by talking briefly about the governor's, I'd like to start by briefly talking about the governor's budget proposal that was presented last week, and then reference that to the budget projections that we've made prior to, that were actually in our budget prior to the governor's proposal. So you can see the governor's the governor's funding for education. The impact on basic education for East Penn is roughly an increase of 1.13% or $202,000. You can see on the special education, it's just a little under 0.5% or $23,000. A majority of the funding put forth by the governor was actually in the Ready to Learn block grant, in the adequacy supplements and tax equity supplements. And so you can see that there's a significant increase for East Penn because we qualify for the adequacy supplement, and that's roughly $1 million. In order to sort of put all this into perspective in terms of last year's budget, what we actually got next year's budget, the governor's proposal, I put this little chart together at the bottom, which I'd like to go through. So, and this really highlights the major components of the governor's budget and where we've seen some ups and downs over the last year. So in the first column, 24-25, that was the budget that the board approved in June and the numbers that we used. So you can see that basic education funding, 17.4 million, special education funding, 4.5 million, and Ready to Learn block grant, 700,000. When the budget was, the Commonwealth budget was actually approved then in July, you can see the appropriations. The basic education funding was actually 17.9 million. There was a new line item called charter transition funding of 300,000, special education funding at 4.7 million. The Ready to Learn block grant, which used to be just Ready to Learn block grant, but became Ready to Learn Block Grant Foundation, was now 705,000. And then there was the Ready to Learn Block Grant Equity piece that we qualified for of 1 million. So you can see we budgeted 22.7 million, and we're receiving in the current year 24.7 million. So you'll recall, hopefully, that $2 million differential. We talked about that in August in terms of that additional funding we were receiving. When putting the state revenue budget together, we took an approach that we commonly use of increasing state revenues by 3%. So you can see basic education, we increased it 3% from what we were allocated for the current year, not what we had budgeted. So 3% increase on 17.9 million is 18.4. The charter transition funding, we weren't really sure what was going to happen with that, so we didn't do anything with that. And then special education funding, again, increased that 3%. And then, again, maintained the Ready to Learn Foundation and equity components. Similar to the charter transition, we weren't really sure what the proposal might be in terms of increases, so we just maintained those. So you can see that the budget for 25-26, when we go back to slide 17, is 25.4 million. The governor's budget proposal, you can see, actually included a lower basic education funding number than we budgeted, a lower special education funding number than we budgeted, but then higher foundation and equity. The foundation is actually the combination of the 24-25 foundation and equity. So if you add the 705 and the 1 million, that gives you the 1.8 million. And then they're giving us a new $1 million for the equity. Hopefully that makes sense. It took me a little while to wrap my head around it when I was just looking at the numbers and didn't have an explanation. So you can see that the governor's proposal, and again, we've talked in the past about the governor's proposal as a starting point. We don't always put a lot of, we don't necessarily put those numbers in our budget. But I just wanted to give this information for sort of comparison purposes. The governor's proposal is about $300,000 more than what we've budgeted in our first draft or preliminary budget. And hopefully this will, again, show you sort of the progressive steps from, okay, what we budgeted last year to what we budgeted for the current year, or for 25-26. So let me go back to those state revenues. So let me just highlight these. We've talked about most of these. We talked about the basic education. We talked about the charter. Oh, and that charter transition funding was not included in the governor's budget. And just a piece of sort of background information, the governor actually did not propose that last year. That was something that was added legislatively after the hearings and when they were putting the budget together. We talked about special education funding, pupil transportation subsidy. Just a reminder, I know I say this every year, the 25-26 subsidy that we receive from the state is based on the 24-25 actual expenses for the school district. Recall that for 24-25, we saw a 16% increase in our transportation costs. From a subsidy standpoint, it's not dollar for dollar, but you can see that there's an estimated 14.75% increase, and that's related to the expenditure increase for 24-25. The rental and sinking fund is reimbursement on our debt service payments, and we, from a debt standpoint, we're continuing to see this sort of lowering of our debt costs, and so there's a fairly significant decrease in our debt expenses for next year. And so we're seeing on the revenue side, we're not going to get reimbursement for that. We talked about the Ready to Learn block grant, and then the final two, Social Security and retirement. Recall that the state gives us 50% reimbursement on the Social Security expenses and retirement expenses of the district. So this is 50% of the anticipated increase in those two line items. From a federal standpoint, you may be aware that the federal budget does not run concurrently with the school district budget the same way the state budget does. And so it's always sort of difficult because the actual funding numbers don't come out for various state programs until the fall, until sometime. I mean, we get estimates in the spring, but the actual numbers don't come out until usually around September. So what we've done in the past is we budget what we're actually receiving in the current year as an estimate. From year to year, we haven't seen significant fluctuations up and down. There have been fluctuations. You can see the decrease from the budgeted 24-25 to the 25-26, which would have been the actuals for the 1 year prior. So you can see we've used the current year revenue for the title programs for Title I and the other federal programs. For medical access, there were some programmatic changes. Medical access funds go into an account with the state, and we can draw those as we need them. There were, as I started to say, there were some programmatic changes that there's less money going into our account, and so there's less money for us to draw and use for expenses. Those expenses traditionally have been to pay for the salaries and benefits of special education teachers. I could anticipate a question, so I'm just going to go ahead and address it in my presentation. A reasonable question would be based on the federal funding freeze that was issued by the executive branch last week, 2 weeks ago. How should we proceed with budgeting federal funds? I think In terms of in the short term, there was a federal judge who issued a temporary restraining order indicating that the executive branch, meaning the president and the Office of Management and Budget, does not have the authority to not distribute funds that were appropriated by congressional action. So I think in the short term, we can be fairly sure, crossing my fingers in my pocket, that we're going to get those funds. I think the risk in the longer term is if in the next budget, whenever that may be, funds are not appropriated, then there wouldn't be funds available. And so I think it's really a toss-up at this point. In terms of our budget and planning, most of this occurred before the activity I just referenced. But I think at this point, it's business as usual. We'll continue to monitor like we do with all of our revenues. If there's some indication, we'll make adjustments in the current year. If there's no indication, my recommendation would be to continue to budget these. We have a budgetary reserve. We have contingency ways to deal with those. Obviously, in future years, then we have to sort of undo the additional money we spent. But I don't think there's enough information at this point to change our course with regard to the federal revenues. I like to close with this slide, which I updated this year. This shows the total percentage from the local, state, and federal. It's a little deceiving because there is some money classified in the local, which comes from a federal source. And that's money that is given to our IU, and we are considered a subrecipient. So the IU is the recipient of our IDEA funds, and we're a subrecipient. So for that reason, we are required to record those as local revenues, but the source is federal. And so I tried to just make it a different color blue so that you can see it's considered local, but it originates from a federal source. And so I forgot to put the percent. It's another 1%. So we have about 2% of our total budget that originates from federal sources. So with that, that is our sort of high-level overview of revenues for 25-26. Again, it's early. As you know, we will continue to work through the process and update these as necessary. And then we will be ready for an expenditure presentation at the next board meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Saul. And I do appreciate the anticipatory questions that you've already addressed. And I'd like to open the floor to the board to ask questions. Ms. Klotz?
Hi. I have more of a statement than anything else. Thank you, as always, Mr. Saul, for getting all of this information together and for disseminating it in a very clear and concise manner for people who are not budget experts like you are. And also, I just want to note that you anticipated all of the questions that I had. So thank you again for being so prepared.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Klotz. Ms. Bowman?
Yeah, for the state, how they shifted how we're being paid to massively simplify that. When they put more in the Ready to Learn block grant than where we had been being funded before, how does that change our budget? Like, are there things that block grant can and can't do?
Yes. I believe, I don't know this for certain. If I had to speculate, from a policy standpoint, they put it in Ready to Learn block grant for two reasons. One, they didn't put it in the basic education funding because that would run through the basic education funding formula and would sort of build the base. They put it in Ready to Learn because it's a block grant. Block grants can go away as easily as they came. There was a second point. Repeat your question.
I was just curious if we could only spend the money a certain way.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's the second thing. Basic education funding doesn't have specific restrictions. The block grant does. There are specific purposes, expanding programs such as full-day kindergarten, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of flexibility with that in terms of supplement versus supplant, meaning we're not required to use those funds to supplement the existing program. We can supplant. Since we have full-day kindergarten, our justification for using the additional funds was continuing to fund full-day kindergarten in our district and just really funding more of the teachers that we already have. And that was actually put in there to offer a lot of flexibility with those funds. So that's our justification for the expenditure. Obviously, they sort of go into our budget and help with all of the things.
Okay, that's really helpful. And this one is just something I was curious about, and you can answer it now or you can wait and answer it when you talk more about expenditures. But I just noticed that 23-24 and 24-25, we spent about 10 million less than we budgeted, give or take. And I was curious what that was due to.
I want to look just so I understand your question, and I may take the option to answer that.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you looking at the total expenditures or the anticipated expenditures?
Hold on, let me find the right slide. I think I was looking at, we budgeted, like on slide 4 for 23-24, 188 million, but we only actually, it looks like we actually only spent 176. Am I reading that wrong?
We actually spent 177. Next
Or
column
177,
over.
sorry, yeah.
Yep. I see what you're referencing. The total, so we did budget 188 million. That included the budgetary reserve line item of 8.9 million. Budgetary reserve is what we budget. It doesn't have, it's not a specific expenditure. It's budgeted as an expenditure, but it's there in case, it's for unforeseen circumstances that could arise that we didn't anticipate during budget development. And so it also gives us flexibility. If we get the extra funds from the state, we don't have to reopen our budget. We can shift monies from budgetary reserve to cover expenditures. So if you take the 188 and you subtract the budgetary reserve, you get the 179 just below that, which we call our anticipated expenditures. We're anticipating we're going to spend 179, but our total expenditures are 188. And total expenditures are what we have to report to the Department of Education, et cetera. But we look at, well, what are our anticipated expenditures? So if you follow that row across, we're anticipating our expenditures to be 179, but they're actually 179. They're actually 177.8.
Okay, so that's just, it's basically a cushion that's built into the budget.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And I will just qualify that and say, when you use the word cushion, it's budgeted as budgetary reserve. And in order to sort of use that for some purpose, the board has to authorize a budget transfer to allow administration to use that. So it's not like we can just say, oh, well, there's an extra $8.9 million. Again, because we're using the anticipated expenditure number to sort of track from year to year, it's there, but we try to carve it out just so that we're looking at what we anticipated.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for the question. More questions? Mr. Falegi.
Yeah, I just have one quick question. First of all, thank you for the presentation. As I'm getting a little bit more used to this, sitting here for a couple of years, it's easier to follow along, so thank you.
Good.
ESSER funding. Is this the last year for our ESSER funds? This coming budget year? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So not to complicate the answer, but the original ESSER funds were grant funds that we received. We were allowed to supplant with those. And so what we did is we took monies that we already budgeted for wages. We used the federal money, and we took that money that we had budgeted and put it aside in a pot, in a fund. And then we used that, we relabeled it as ESSER offset, and we're spending that down each year. And so I like to qualify that because it's not the original, it's not the grant money. And if somebody listening on YouTube hears that, it's not the grant money. It's the money we set aside, and you're correct. At the end of this year, we'll have about $50,000+ remaining.
Thank you.
And so that should taper off.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the question. Additional comments or questions from the board? Okay, I have one question. I do appreciate the fact that you pulled in the proposed numbers from the governor's presentation. I do think that that's important to consider, just to see what the direction is, and then compare and challenge our assumptions. So, I think the numbers release the basic education funding, the special ed, as you said, in addition to the Ready to Learn with the adequacy supplement that went that. I think there was additionally some kind of cyber savings supplement. How does that impact East Penn?
So the additional cyber savings piece that you're referencing is the state, the governor is representing that there will be savings by going to a flat regular education tuition rate for cyber students of $8,000 per student. That has been proposed as legislation for a number of years. I'm not confident that that legislation crosses the finish line this year. The projections that I believe it was the governor prepared indicated that East Penn would save about $1.2 million.
Yeah, that's the number that I heard, but we're not going to count those proverbial chickens.
I think there's some risk to incorporating that.
Okay. All right.
At this point.
Thank you for that. So again, overall, speaking on behalf of the board, again, we appreciate a complete presentation and also the thorough explanations of where all these revenue sources come from. And again, I think it's a good resource for the public if they spend the time to listen to this to understand where things are. So if there are no further questions from the board, we'll allow you to resume your seat or retake your seat up here at the dais. But again, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda is under personnel. Before I call for a motion, I'd just like to call attention to one change under item 4, under general leave of absences, under uncompensated leave for Radiris Rodriguez Hernandez. The position is actually an instructional assistant for McCungy Building and spanning from 2/18 to 2/21/2025. So with that change, I might call for a motion to approve the personnel items.
So moved. Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson,
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. I think Dr. Campbell may have something she'd like to add.
I do, thank you. The board just accepted the retirement of Dr. Tony Moyer, specifically for his retirement at the end of this school year. I think our community and certainly our board recognizes that Dr. Moyer has been a real dedicated employee of the East Penn School District. Specifically, he'll retire after 33 years with us. Although his journey in East Penn began well before 33 years. Tony actually attended East Penn schools as a student, so he was a student at Lincoln and Jefferson. He attended Emmaus Junior High. He is a graduate of Emmaus High School, and in 1992, he joined our East Penn team officially as a teacher at Jefferson Elementary, where he served at the elementary level for about 12 years before taking on an elementary principalship at Wescosville Elementary. And certainly, we know that the last about 15 years of his career has been at Willow Lane Elementary. And in 2010, Dr. Moyer became the first principal at Willow Lane Elementary and was really instrumental in a successful opening of, at the time, what was a newly constructed school. So Certainly, we can all appreciate that there is a tremendous amount of leadership effort that goes into building a new school community, and he did an outstanding job with that. He will always be noted for his commitment to building a positive school culture characterized by strong relationships with students, staff, and families. He's noted for building positive connections with the community stakeholders that really ultimately create a well-rounded educational experience for our students that includes an emphasis on academics, the arts, and extracurriculars. Tony is the type of principal that can be spotted making pancakes in the morning for the Student of the Month breakfast, engaging with students in the school garden, or sitting down next to students in their classroom so that he really can see firsthand the activities in which they're engaged. We certainly appreciate, sincerely appreciate his leadership and commitment to the students and the community of East Penn. And certainly congratulate him and wish him well in his future adventures. And don't forget, he's with us until June, so we're excited to have the spring to celebrate with him.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Campbell. Any other comments? Okay, moving on to business operations. If there are no objections, I'd like to take a motion on items A, B, and C.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Moving on to item D under business items is a discussion of the LRTA resolution prior to taking a motion for the I guess the 7 of us to embark on a discussion tonight. I don't know if the administration has any words.
Yeah, I'll just provide a little bit of background for the community in terms of how we got to this point with regard to the LRTA. So quick bit of history. At our November 11th school board meeting, Michael Mayer, who's actually in the audience with us this evening, he represents Westrum Development Company. Mr. Mayer presented an overview of the Furnace Street apartment development that is planned for Emmaus, and shared the request for a local economic revitalization tax assistance. Again, what is known as the LRTA. So that goes back to our November board meeting. Based on the LRTA presentation and preliminary comments and discussion from our board members, the board then discussed a LRTA resolution at the December 9th meeting. That included the general terms of the agreement as well as a proposed 5-year tax exemption schedule. We, as an administrative team, considered the feedback from the board, and administration since that time has made several revisions, I should say, to the resolution. And I'll just point out those revisions that are reflected in the draft this evening. Specifically, we updated language regarding the interim taxes on the property. There has been an adjustment to the tax schedule, which provides some tax relief to the developer, while also providing the district with greater tax revenue from this property over that 5-year schedule that's proposed. And then the reassessment period was changed to 5 years. It had been 10 in the original draft. The resolution that's before the board this evening, again, certainly will, as Dr. Levinson mentioned, will be open for discussion in just a minute. It is intended to be an action item, but this is really a time for the board to discuss the resolution, including, certainly if there are other considerations for that 5-year tax schedule, it's the will of the board then to have that public discussion. And so at this point, I'll turn it back to Dr. Levinson.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. So to open discussion, may I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Klotz. Okay, who would like to begin comment? Mr. Smith.
All right. So I'm glad we're talking about it again, and I'm going to try to get out as much as I can in one talk rather than three like last time. So just to recap my thoughts from the last time we had the conversation, fully in favor of the project. I think it's a great project. I think it has a lot of benefit to the community. Certainly, nobody likes to see an eyesore like we have currently on the property now. The project as it stands, no concerns whatsoever. Going to be a great thing, and that's because of all the benefits. But one of the biggest pieces that I need to hammer home here again is that this is a project that is already ready to go and get off the ground, regardless of what happens here tonight. Whatever happens here tonight, I am going to ultimately support. So it's part of the deal of being on a board like this. That what the will of the board is, the will of the board shall be. So I'm going to support whatever the board decides here moving forward. But I did have a couple of things that I just wanted to make sure that we all were aware of before we go forward and vote on this topic tonight. A couple of concerns that I have weren't mentioned last time. I want to be cognizant of the fact that we are not a zoning board. We are getting close to territory that could be considered the work of a zoning board, identifying what projects are good, what projects are not. As we're taking a look at the project and deciding whether we're going to be giving money towards this or not, if we do, we are just giving them money because we decided that we like the project. It has no bearing on whether the project happens or not. It's just we're saying that we like the project. That would be precedent setting, saying that here's a pocket full of money that we are giving back to you without any real set criteria as to why we are approving that project, why we are saying that we like that project. So if we do go forward and approve this project, be sure that there are going to be other projects coming forward, other developers coming forward that are going to want to reach out to us and say, well, you did that project over there. How about this project over here? How about this project over here? And they're going to come, and we need to make sure that if this is something we're going to go forward with, we have some sort of criteria with which to measure the efficacy of any one project over another. I had a little bit of concern with the comps that were used. The project referenced the apartments across the street from the high school, really across from Wawa. And those are a much older development of apartments, so I'm a little concerned about with that part. The idea of giving money back to the developers now at this point, because we like a project, it does overall have, it continues not to sit well with me. We're coming on the heels of a 26% increase in Emmaus. We have community members that are already going to be feeling the sting of that, and the revenue that we are potentially losing by agreeing to this project is only going to be another layer on top of that. Whether we have one student come out of this project or 1,000 students come out of the project, not that we're going to have 1,000 students come out, but whatever that may be, those expenses associated with those students, that is a point that I don't think we really need to belabor, because we're not talking about expenses. We're talking about how we're going to offset those expenses with revenue and the loss of said revenue. So our mission and what we're focused on here is making sure that we are focused on the needs of students and teachers and our families that use our schools. And with that, I'd like to take a look at what I put together with some numbers, and these very well could be rough. I did did share my numbers with administration previously, so if they may have that and want to correct me, that's totally fine if I'm off. But I took a look at each of the years, and I said, okay, here's the lost revenue for each one of the 5 years. And sure, we can say, for example, in year one, there's a potential difference of $202,000 in lost revenue for year one. But what we also need to consider is what we are using that potentially $202,000 for. And so I went back to last year's budget priorities, and I looked at the dollar amount that we assigned to every single one of those budget priorities that we approved last year. And so I'm going to go forward with that line of thinking, because this is what, if we go forward, we are going to have to face the facts of either eliminating similar priorities because we don't have that revenue, or going back to raising revenue in other means to cover that lost revenue. So in that first year, $202,000, if we had the priorities from last year, we would have to delay the priority of one ELA interventionist and one student advisor just in year one. In year two, the difference in lost revenue would be $160,000. We would have to delay the priority from last year of one EHS teacher, one IA, and one part-time IA moving up to full-time. In year three, $118,000 of lost revenue. We would have to delay one special ed teacher. In year four, $76,000 in lost revenue. We would have to delay the budget priority of one student advisor. And then in year five, we'll call it $34,000 in lost revenue. That would be equivalent to delaying the priority of 3 part-time IAs to full-time. So all told, from what was shared with us and from what I'm able to understand over the course of 5 years, there's roughly a total missed revenue of $591,190.25. And then the priority items that we would be delaying were equivalent to $587,000. So as we're taking a look at these numbers going forward and taking a look at approving this or not approving this, that's something that is the real human piece that we might have to consider postponing. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Klotz.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for that explanation of what we stand to lose with the revenue. I would also like to say I agree the Furnace Street property has long been an eyesore and an environmentally blighted property in Emmaus. Having the land remediated and new housing built upon it may help attract more residents and business to Emmaus. However, I would also like to keep in mind, Westrum Development Company will receive a 10-year tax abatement from Emmaus, which is more appropriate as the apartments will be in Emmaus. Westrum is remediating the environmental damage under PA DEP Act 2, which does provide financial assistance and also waives liability for future claims against Westrum. Westrum has said they will not pass the tax relief they receive from Emmaus Borough or East Penn School District to their future residents. Westrum has already noted the project will continue regardless as to the East Penn School District LURDA decision. Also, let's keep in mind that Westrum is not operating a charity. They've designed and developed over 100 properties and have won over 80 awards. As a successful property developer, they must see potential profits for the Furnace Street property that far outweigh any losses. Our school district should not leave money on the table that our community could use to offset the cost of planned projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Klotz. Other comments? Ms. Bowman?
Yeah, I'm maybe a little more on the fence than my colleagues are, but kind of going to echo some of the same thoughts. I'm actually, usually a big fan of economic development and seeing what the city of Bethlehem did with South Bethlehem and how that over, gosh, probably decades has massively benefited that school district. In that way, I think economic development can be life-changing for a school district, but it has to be planned. Those projects didn't happen one at a time as developers came in. The city and maybe even the school district got together and planned out that whole, it's more than one project. But, and I'm also, brownfield redevelopment is something I'm also in favor of. I'd much rather see this on the current brownfield than on farm fields in this area. So the project itself, I think, is wonderful. I am having a hard time with the just under $600,000 that this adds up to. That seems like a lot of goodwill that the district is giving to the developers for really nothing in return. It sounds like, from what we were told, the project's going to happen anyway. And so this isn't us at the very beginning of a plan trying to figure out how to redevelop an area so that we can see tax revenue down the road. The tax revenue is going to come regardless of what we do tonight. And the question is, how much tax revenue is going to come? Goodwill probably won't make this particular company redevelop other brownfields in our area either. So I'm just not really sure of the upside for the school district. It would be maybe a little easier for me if this was going to be commercial, a nursing home, 55 plus, something where we didn't have to also weigh the loss of revenue against the possible increase in cost for us. I'm leaning against this, although I'll say that I do like the revised schedule a lot better than the one we had before. I think it would have been an $800,000 revenue loss in the previous schedule. Now it's only about $600,000, so that's obviously a benefit.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Ms. Bowman. Mr. Jankowski.
I'm going to stay consistent with my support for this, as I have for the last two meetings. Understanding that the developer is proceeding with this regardless. In any event, I don't see this as lost revenue. I see this, in any event, as additional revenues that are coming into the school district, as well as support for future economic development. I see this as a plus. You know, if the borough supported this LRTA and the project, I don't see a downside in the school district doing the same and showing that we are in support of. And while this is already, it's going to happen regardless, I do think the added benefits to the developer will lead to making this a more appealing project, as well as show other developers, not only in Emmaus, but throughout this school district, that we're willing to be cooperative and try to draw that economic development. So I see this as, in any event, a plus for this school district. So, I appreciate the changes that were made to this resolution. So I remain in full support of this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jankowski. Other comments? Mr. Kelly.
I'd like to echo Jeff. I agree with the LRTA, and I appreciate the changes to it. I would support more of a change for the school district to gain more revenue, and even decreasing it from like a 5 to a 4 year. Like, I would recouping some of the revenue, I think, is appropriate. But in terms of the LRTA itself, I'm in support of it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kelly. Additional comments, Mr. Falagi.
So, to echo Mr. Kelly and Mr. Jankowski, I was on board with this. However, I'm really leaning on the fence right now. To Mr. Smith's point, Ms. Klotz and Ms. Bowman, I really struggle in the fact of losing all that tax revenue coming in right off the start. I'm very, very thankful, as a borough resident that Western has come in and is doing this project. I guess where I struggle the most with everything and being on the fence is the 26% tax increase we just got hit with here in the borough. It's a big chunk of money for a lot of people that live here in the borough. And I just don't feel like we can keep putting more and more on the taxpayer, to be honest. So that's where I stand. I'm really on the fence with this. So.
Okay, I appreciate those comments. Okay, well, I'd like to make my own comments about this. I'm just going to say right from the beginning that I am in favor of moving forward with a version of this LRTA for this project. Again, I appreciate the administration's efforts to revise a draft based on the feedback that we had from the prior meetings. So, I'm reminded of the old adage is that we don't want to miss the forest for the trees. So, I think, and again, I love how this board is very deliberative and very analytical in bringing things up. But we've talked about talked about a lot of trees, but we haven't necessarily talked too much about the big picture, and I think that's where a lot of my comments were from the last meetings. So certainly, the fact that we're developing an undesirable property, a brownfield, something that's that wasn't serving any greater purpose, is a positive. I think, for us to consider tax abatement, I think it is incumbent on the district to exercise that ability selectively. I think that, setting a high bar on future projects, I think, is important, and the fact that this has an environmental remediation aspect is an excellent application of that. So in my mind, projects that do not have significant development issues are not good candidates for tax abatement for the district to consider. My concern is that if we pass on this, I think we take take a hit on the district's commitment to be a solid community partner with our various municipalities that the district encompasses. So we have the borough of Manus, we have the Macungie borough, and we have Albertus, we have our two townships, and all of those municipalities have their limitations in terms of what land is developable, and if we can do something that promotes the conversion of undesirable and troubled properties to something that has greater value, I think that is important, because again, we're embarking on the budget process where access to additional revenue is key to maintaining each and every one of the objectives that Dr. Campbell mentioned tonight. Again, I'm concerned for instance, for Emmaus Borough that did make the effort to create their own ordinance in order to implement that, and I would like to have East Penn follow in some fashion in order to support that effort. We are a partner. We are a partner with our communities. I don't believe that every potential LRTA project, if they do come along, is necessarily going to involve housing, so we don't necessarily have to concern ourselves with additional costs for educating students. They could be offices, shops, manufacturing, storage. nursing home, like Ms. Bowman mentioned. And again, trying to create some positive function that can, build economic development within our community. We want to have the East Bend School District be something that's attracted to developers to come in and look at our properties. Whether or not they're looking for tax abatement, they want to see a community that is going to be supportive of smart development. And if I am concerned that if we don't do something that shows that we want to bring in productive development, we're going to lose out on opportunities to bring in additional tax revenue. So, moving forward with some version of the LRTA, is more than just saying that we like the project. It's and I understand this in this specific one, and it's moving forward regardless. I think that there are ramifications in whatever action we take that could stunt future decisions for people to come in, and if they decide instead they're going to go build in Whitehall or Parkland or something like that, we'll lose out. And so, whatever dollars that we've computed in whatever abatement schedule that we have, we could be losing a lot more if we don't have other groups come in and want to provide that or do that kind of development. So, short-term capture without the LRTA may sacrifice long-term gains is the point I'm trying to make there. Just looking at my notes. So, I think that something like this, again, with the confounding factors that we say, again, the project's moving forward, that, it is significant potential money we're leaving on the table. I just think that it may be at the expense of, if we don't do this, it may be at the expense of things that are going to do more for our community as we move on. And if we do the LRTA, however many years that takes, we are going to have increased revenue, and I think that's also important to make. So I'm actually going to propose a couple things for this board to consider and perhaps either make modifications or perhaps move this to give another opportunity for us to discuss. And if you will note that there are only 7 of us here tonight. There are 2 other board members who I think have important viewpoints. So I'm just going to put it out there that perhaps we may want to table this discussion until we have a full complement. The other thing to think about, if we do table this, or if we want to move forward, if we decide we want to move forward with a vote, is that we have full discretion to modify the draft that's before us. I think Mr. Kelly made a valid point. Again, we do have concerns about reducing the amount of revenue that's coming to the district. If we want, we can create an aggressive tax abatement schedule. We could do a 3-year plan, and we could go 75, 50, 25. And if you add up what we compared to the original schedule, that schedule actually will have the amount of money that we would be foregoing in rough terms. I would, if we do make that change, I would still recommend that we give ourselves the full 10-year window, which includes the time of the tax abatement plus however many years to get to a total of 10 years from the start, so that we ensure that there is not any reassessment request to go with that. So I think hopefully Mr. Fisher follows what I'm saying when I say that. So those are my general thoughts. I would encourage my board members to consider those things, and if there's agreement, again, either to perhaps change the draft that's before us, or put this off to another meeting in the not too distant future. Consider when we have the full complement of the board. I would encourage them to speak up on that. Mr. Jankowski?
I think it's important that we have the full board here for a decision like this. As you said, I think everyone has valid concerns and support. So I do think it is important to have the full 9. I would also support additional edits as you and Mr. Cully had indicated.
Okay. I did see some head nodding. If we would like to table this for tonight, we need someone to make that motion and second, and we can vote on that. Did you have a comment, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, just before we go to that point, because if I remember correctly from past motions to table, there's no more comment after that. So if I could just jump in before we make that motion.
Absolutely, Mr. Smith.
Yeah. You had mentioned, how we have our different local governments and our partnerships that we have with them. You also talked about the malleability, for lack of a better word, of being able to adjust the draft to reflect whatever we felt was the best way forward. My question for the administration is, if it is so flexible that we can adjust it to fit what we deem to be the best path forward, how much input and collaboration took place in the development of the LRTA as it is written with the Borough of Emmaus? How much input did they have on that, and does ours reflect their version of it? Was there any discussion there in this case?
I'll also defer to Mr. Fisher, who helped to develop the resolution, but I'll say in terms of, just to answer a portion of your question, the tax exemption schedule was modeled after that the Borough of Emmaus adopted, in that it was a 5-year tax abatement schedule. The original schedule that the board discussed, meaning starting at 100% in year 1, that was also the same as the boroughs. So from administration's perspective, that was perhaps the level of similarity in terms of that schedule. Our initial schedule was modeled after the boroughs. Mr. Fisher, I don't know if you have additional comments regarding other items in the resolution.
Well, let me say this. Both the administration and myself had seen the borough resolution. No question about it. It was a public document. Mm-hmm. And so as Dr. Campbell explained, we started that as a framework. Without repeating everything she said, there are differences, though, that were in our proposed resolution from the get-go. That included the period of time following the expiration of the exemptions for the non-filing of an assessment appeal. That was not included whatsoever in the borough documents. I believe also we certainly beefed up the language regarding interim tax bills. I think ours is a little bit, and no disrespect to the borough, I think ours is a little bit clearer on that. Those were the two main areas of difference from the get-go with the borough.
Okay, so I guess I am open to discussion on that point in terms of the need for increased collaboration between the different governmental entities. I think that's really important, and I think that frankly we don't do enough of that as it is, and I don't think it's on any one governmental entity shoulders more than another. Like, I think it's just something that should be just good best practice for working together. I think as we are talking about the potential of other projects coming along, I would argue that if there's a developer looking at a potential project, they would want to look at all of the municipalities that are that have hands on that project to say, okay, are you working together? Are you collaborating on what a particular LERTA in this case might be, what the language might be, what the structure of it might be. Rather than to say, somebody with the most skin in the game, you go first, and then I'll follow you, and then somebody else follows third. Like, the more that we can do to have a collaborative discussion about what these kinds of projects might be and might look like, both in terms of collaboration among the municipalities, but also on the part of the developer. And I think that's the part that's missing here. I would want to, in those collaborative discussions, be able to say, okay, here's the things that we're looking for that's going to benefit our communities, and craft potential LERTA structures or what have you around those priorities in conjunction with the other municipalities. Maybe that slows things down. Maybe that is something that could just be had at the administrative level amongst all the different counterparts. But I think that's something that is a lesson that can be learned by all parties in this going forward. That it's just, to me, in my mind, it seems like good business to do it that way, than to have somebody jump in, plan out the project, get it all ready to go, and then come back and say, hey, can we work something out when it's already been said and done? So, yeah, I mean, that's just, I guess, my thoughts based on what Dr. Levinson had shared. I just wanted to put that out there before we get to what sounds like to be a table vote.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any additional comments prior to tabling?
Just a quick one.
Ms. Bowman?
I think part of why I'm having a hard time getting to yes on this is because I don't really know. The information hasn't been given to us about why the developer needs the tax abatement. It was just sort of presented like there's this project, it's a brownfield, some stuff's being cleaned up there. But so and I know they're here, and this is the only reason I'm saying this, if they would like to provide some more information about how the tax abatement will be used. And I did ask this question during the presentation, but I never really got a clear answer about why the tax abatement will lead to a more successful project. That information could get me from a no to a yes. So I just wanted to put it out there, because if that can be supplied to the administration and then to the board, that could be helpful. But otherwise, I'm happy to table this.
All right, thank you for that comment. Anything additional? And I apologize, I forget, did I call for the motion yet? One more point?
Make a motion to table.
Make the motion, okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, with that, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Kelly.
Aye.
Ms. Klotz.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Falegi.
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski.
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen, and thank you to my colleagues on the board for another substantive discussion. We'll eventually reach a decision. Okay. All right, picking up on our agenda, I will now move on to curriculum. If there are no objections, I'd like to take items A and B together.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Ms. Klotz.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Bowman.
Aye.
Mr. Falegi.
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski.
Aye.
Mr. Kelly.
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Item C is for discussion and information, the long-awaited 25-26 East Penn School District student-teacher calendar. Would the administration like to make some comments?
Yes, we do have some general comments for the long-awaited 25-26 student-teacher calendar. The information that's shared tonight, again, is just that. It's for information only. Our standard practice in the district is that we allow time for the calendar, the draft calendar, to be out in the community for the board to consider and also for any feedback. And so we anticipate that we will bring the calendar back for a vote at a future meeting, likely the March 10th meeting. So certainly that gives us some time. As in previous years, we follow a similar process in terms of how we develop the student-teacher calendar. Specifically, there is always the intent to maximize instructional time. Therefore, you see the same number of student days in the calendar, which is 183. We also balance the importance of professional development, family schedules, and overall consistency with other Lehigh County schools is also really important to us, particularly so that we can be consistent in the LCTI programming for our high school students. In addition, I think we all appreciate that the teacher contract stipulates the total number of teacher days, which you see 189 days that are reflected on this calendar. I will say there are 2 days of professional expectations that are not noted in this particular calendar, just in case any board member thinks to the recent collective bargaining agreement that was approved. So you see 189 days in here, and there are 2 additional days that are not reflected on this calendar. In addition, this calendar, we have built in 2 snow days. And as a reminder, school districts may use up to 5 flexible instructional days per school year. You'll see many consistencies or similarities between this calendar and the current 24-25 calendar. I'll point out that the proposed first day of school for students is again the Monday before Labor Day, so that's Monday, August 25th. The last student day is proposed to be Wednesday, June 10th. I will also point out, because it's already been highlighted for us, East Penn as well as Lehigh County schools are proposing that we would have a full 2-week winter break similar to the one that we had this year. So again, those are some of the key features that I'll point out to the calendar. Certainly if there's any questions, my team or I are happy to respond to them, but tonight really is about presenting the information to the board and the community.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Are there any general comments from the board? Okay, well, I would just like to say again, I appreciate the efforts. I know it can be a challenge to try and find wherever all this, but again, I think that 2-week winter break, I think, is attractive to a lot of people, so it's nice to see that come up again. All right, so we'll have another opportunity to discuss this in a future meeting. Moving on to item D, the 2025 to 2028 Gifted Education Plan Assurances. I believe the administration has something planned to review that.
Yeah, this is not a formal presentation. This one is also just a general information item as well. So in just a minute, Mrs. Freed, who is our Director of Special Education, is going to give us a high-level overview of the components of the Gifted Education Plan Assurances. That's a mouthful. I just want to start off and give some background and context to this particular plan. So the Gifted Education Plan Assurances is a requirement in Pennsylvania. Specifically, it outlines the district's guidelines for identifying and educating students who qualify for gifted services in the district. The guidelines and the expectations that must be included in the plan are based on Chapter 16 of the Pennsylvania School Code, again, specifically related to gifted education. These assurances must be updated every 3 years and submitted to the Department of Education, and the timing of that correlates to the submission of the comprehensive plan. And so, again, as Mrs. Freed talks through the general expectations of the Gifted Assurances Plan, you will note that it is far less robust than the comprehensive plan, but just speaks to those general categories of perhaps how we identify and program for students. So at this point, Mrs. Freed is going to give us a high-level overview. Again, there's no action to be taken. It's a presentation of the plan. Following tonight, the plan will be posted posted on the district website and will remain there. And then ultimately, at a future meeting, we will be seeking action from the board for not only the gifted assurances plan, but for the comprehensive plan and other sub-plans within that.
Okay, good evening. So similar to our special education plan that I presented on last school year in the spring, if you recall, the gifted plan is a general overview of our programming, but in much more less explicitly defined sense. So it's not a lot of detail as far as how many teachers and caseloads and how our student population grows over time, but it's more focused on 4 specific areas as what the plan speaks to. One being the identification process of gifted students. 2, the programming at all levels, which focuses on individualized student-specific strength-based needs in ELA, math, and science. Enrollment data and proportionality, and finally, professional development. And as Dr. Campbell said, the gifted plan will be posted on the district website for 28 days, and the board will take action on the plan at the second meeting in March, along with the comprehensive plan and all other state-required reports. I also want to point out that gifted programming will be an area of ongoing discussion as we continue to work on the realignment plan that will take place in several years down the road.
Okay, thank you for that overview. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Ms. Bowman?
Yeah, just a clarification. So it looks like all students are, I'm not sure if I'm going to use the right terminology here. I'm just going to say assessed in some way. And then based on those initial assessments, you identify people or students who may be eligible for gifted. Is that how it works?
Correct.
Okay. So there, because of this isn't, it's not as if, I mean, I'm sure this happens too. It's not as if the educators see a student who they feel is good for gifted, and then they single them out to have them tested, or their parents ask. I'm sure those situations come to you as well, but I guess my bigger question is, all students kind of have the opportunity because of the way that we're doing this?
Yes, so it's very similar, and it's run through an MTSS process, just like identification for students of special education. A student can be referred to the gifted school team to look at benchmark scores and then be referred for further screening for giftedness.
Okay, so I just want to, I'm just happy to hear that it's not so subjective, that students who don't have parents fighting for them can still be identified with this, so that's wonderful. This is probably not the right, I'm not even sure why I'm bringing this up, it's only because this is gifted and it's not part of this, but students who are in middle school identified as gifted, probably from elementary school, but then they don't end up going into honors. They basically are identified as gifted, but they don't have a gifted program at that point, because the gifted program is offered only through the honors classes, and it's just something that I think you might want to look at. It's surprising to me that the parents of those students haven't complained. Maybe there's just not enough of them, or they don't know that they can, but it's just something that I wanted to mention.
And we can certainly look into that as we plan to look at programmatic changes moving into realignment.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I'm super excited that this is going to be a big topic of discussion going forward for a whole host of reasons. When I was looking through this, I was especially pleased to see that professional development is built into that. It is an area of education where it is easy to overlook, because you can have some folks that just say, and it could be parents too, my kids or this student is really good at school and I'm not worried about him, he's going to be fine. And we really owe it to all of our students to make sure that they are all having the same opportunity to make 1 year's growth in 1 year's time, if not more, no matter where they happen to fall on the continuum of learners. So I'm just really excited that this is happening, and I'm looking forward to additional discussions to come.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Any additional comments? Okay, well, thank you again to the administration for putting that together, and we look forward to approving it at a future meeting. I guess before we move on, there is some breaking news that I'd like to have Dr. Campbell state.
Well, I'm waiting for the final score, but there was about a minute left and Emmaus was up, so you might need to give me another.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll wait a little bit longer, but
Before we adjourn, so we can put it on record that we beat Parkland.
all right. Well, as an engineer, the approximation is good enough, so maybe we can just say that. Okay. We would have a report tonight from CLIU, but Dr. Whitney is not with us tonight, so we're going to have him present that at our next meeting. Moving on to announcements, we did have an executive session tonight where we talked about a matter related to litigation. The district will be closed on February 17th in honor of President's Day. Our next regular board meeting is scheduled for Monday, February 24th at 7:30 in this room.
I'm still waiting for the final update.
Oh, you got the dots?
So we could either, we could find a new item to discuss now.
We'll just give this another.
Yeah, so moved.
Okay, the final score, 57-44 Emmaus.
Hey,
Go.
all right.
Yay.
Great job, Hornets. The next game they'll play again next Thursday.
Okay,
So.
excellent. All right, with no further business before the board, I'd like to get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Meeting adjourned. Enjoy the rest of your evening.